Everything's on fire. Everything's on fire. Everything's on fire.
Happy Monday and welcome back, Heat Seekers. We are back with another installment of the IDP Heat Seekers. We only got 4 more of these before the season gets here, so enjoy them while they're here. As always, I am joined by my partner in crime, my IDP cohort, Mr. Kraig Reith. How are you tonight, brother? How's the world treating you in your neck of the woods?
It was very much a Monday. Just busy across the board, but nothing like terrible blew up or caused problems in that regard. So good busy. 4-day week for me this week. I have Friday off. So
look at you.
About that.
I'm about to say, I hear you got a card show this weekend, right? Isn't that what you're doing? What you're getting a long weekend for?
I mean, sort of that way. I mean, I'm getting up probably earlier to meet up with some people and then carpool there. But it was just more. This is just a busy time of the year with school starting up again. I know you said your kids started up here already. Mine will be next week. Birthdays, all that stuff. I mean, it's just a busy month. So August is probably the month I take the most time off during the year in general. So.
Well, and it's, I mean, I was always one of those that like to use up my vacation time in the warmer months anyway, because I want to be outside and I want to enjoy my time off. Like a lot of guys at my work love to take off, all of December. And I'm like, what's the purpose in that? It's cold, it's snowy potentially. Like you're just going to be home anyway. So why? So August is a great month for that. Yeah, it is. Same here. My kids started last Wednesday, so this is the first full week of school. So it's getting back into the routine and getting the kids back into their routine. The same, and me getting back in my routine has been a fun challenge. But it's that time of year, and especially with the season picking up, this is the perfect time for all that to happen, so we can get back into the swing of what the regular season looks like. And we had plenty of football last weekend, so I've been trying to catch up on all the games, and I DVR'd every game. So I was trudging through the fourth quarter of Giants-Jets earlier this afternoon, and not getting anything super sexy there. But it was a fun weekend of football. So with that being said, Sully, it's good to see you, brother. As always, good to see you, and I'll see you tomorrow night. I know that much. What's going on in the football world, Kraig? What kind of news and notes we want to talk about tonight?
Yeah, so a lot of this is just what we have had in regards to stuff from the preseason games and or sort of veteran signings for depth that probably won't amount to much, but you never know, so it's kind of worth paying attention to. Mm-hmm. 2 of those, the veteran signings, that is Michael Kendricks, who's 30, and then Clinton Dix, who you know well from formerly being mainly of the Packers, who's 28. They both signed with the 49ers. I think they were both relatively cheap 1-year deals. I don't think he played much at all last year. He had signed with the Cowboys, and then he didn't even make the team for the regular season, I'm pretty sure. So it is interesting in that I'm of the opinion that the 49ers could use depth, both at safety as far as veteran depth, because they fancy themselves a team with Super Bowl aspirations in a very competitive division. They do need some linebacker and safety help. They have Greenlaw and Warner as their 2 main guys sort of there behind that. Maybe good. We'll have to see. They've got some good parts on that defensive line. And then the safeties, they have Tart and Ward again this year. But again, they've had injuries. Both those guys have in the past. And maybe will provide some veteran depth. He had some good years with the Packers. So we'll see what happens. But, nothing immediate that I saw for either of those 2 in terms of playing time. What did you think?
Yeah, he's interesting because he was very fantasy relevant with Green Bay, and then all of a sudden just kind of dropped off a cliff as soon as he left. He is definitely one of those that it's going to take injuries, I would think. If he makes the roster, it would take injuries. Kendricks, I think, has a clear path to playing time unless they leave him in the mic, which he's not going to beat out Fred Warner for significant playing time. But they have a hole at the weak side linebacker. Now, I know that isn't the sexiest position for IDP relevance, but the way that San Francisco's defense tends to run, there's a fairly heavy 3 linebacker sets on a regular basis on the field for them. So if he could get moved to the will and play a little bit more on the weak side and use that range and that speed of his, he might be a guy that could give you some fantasy relevance sooner rather than later. Because there, like you said, there isn't a lot of depth, and even who they have penciled in as the starter right now, Flanagan Foles is not exactly. Not only is he not a household name, but he's not a guy that Kendricks has more talent, has the longer experience in the league, and I mean, there's so many reasons to think that he could overtake for playing time there, but because they were both signed in training camp, those are more wait and sees. I wouldn't encourage anyone to go roster either of those guys immediately. Watch preseason, see how they're used, see what they're doing, see if they fit in the scheme, things like that. I mean, that would be more where I'm at with both those guys.
Yeah, and really it's a sort of staying healthy sort of thing for him too. Last year I think he played in one game and was out for the year. And then he played 14 games in 2019. He played in 4 games. Both of those were Seattle, 2018. So, I'm not saying he's injury prone. Again, we've been over that enough. But, 2 of the past 3 years, he's played single-digit games, low single-digit games. So, right. As someone gets up there in age, some of these guys, just their bodies can't handle it anymore. So that's something worth paying attention to see if they can even make it through camp, which sometimes they can't, unfortunately.
Yeah, sadly.
And speaking of injuries, this isn't overly IDP relevant, maybe in your interior lineman or defensive tackle leagues, but Neville Gallimore is out for 4 to 6 weeks with a dislocated elbow. This matters more, I guess, for sort of defensive special teams units, where the Cowboys, which already didn't have a whole lot of veteran depth or any great depth at all in that interior of their line, it just gets hit harder. And hopefully he can come back and be good to go for, week 7, 8, something like that, on the long end of that projection, because it's 4 to 6 weeks from the preseason. But that was a tough thing to see. He'd been actually starting to play really well. He was a rookie last year for them, and I liked what I saw out of him. But we'll probably have some catching up to do, and we'll have to see what he can contribute this year.
The nice thing for Dallas is that they did a good job adding some potential depth pieces on the interior. I only watched about 3/4 of the Dallas game from over the weekend, but Odigizua looked good. I know he didn't get a ton on the stats columns. I think he only had like a couple of tackles and an assist or something. But when you put him out there, he looked better than I expected him to, for sure. But between him and Bohanna, I think you've got some nice interior depth there that they could weather if Neville Gallimore is out for some time into the season. They could weather it. Now, neither of those are super IDP relevant, like you said, unless you play interior linemen. And even then, there'll be plenty of other options to put out there over these guys if you need them in a pinch. So, I would probably not be jumping on either of them. If I was, it's probably Osa Odigizua, because I think he's at least looked good in a little bit of time so far.
I just think those linebackers are going to be a lot more busy trying to get off of blocks, because none of those guys are impressive right off the bat in terms of consistent starters at the NFL at this point in their career. And, for defensive special teams units, not that people were really targeting Dallas to begin with, but probably not someone you want to be looking at.
Absolutely.
We're going to skip over the next one here and come back to it. Sticking on the injury route, Joseph Osai had a right wrist injury. He was taken out of the game in the third quarter. Before then, he was actually showing pretty well. He had 2 solos and assist and 1 sack, 1 tackle for a loss. And the sack, he actually made a fool out of Tristan Wirfs. It was a really nice play by him, who, if you're not familiar with offensive linemen, Wirfs is a good one. They have a nice offensive line there in Tampa Bay to protect Tom Brady, as I'm sure he required when he went there. So last I saw, I checked a little while ago today. I didn't see any huge update. I don't know if you did, Brad, but hopefully it's nothing major for him, because he was actually showing some promise.
Okay, so 16 minutes ago, Bengals Wire posted that Bengals took a huge step forward for another one right back, blah, 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 blah. Joseph Osai was a massive breakout, and talked about how well he did. He suffered an injury in the second half. Osai was it looks like he's day-to-day at the moment, it sounds like. No bones shattered in the initial census. He's going to be okay, and he'll be back in time for the opener, given the condensed preseason. he should, so they're still anticipating him back in time to get involved in the season opener. So, hopefully, and he did. The defense as a whole, I thought Cincinnati's defense as a whole looked, obviously, preseason game one, not facing the elite talent across the board in Tampa, but I thought a lot of them looked good, in the time that they had. I mean, you saw plenty of guys, doing some of those things. Sample, Bledsoe, Hodge. I mean, they all got in and did some things. That most of those guys are depth guys on the defense and probably not going to be IDP relevant if ever. Osai is the one I think has a chance of giving you IDP relevancy at some point because of his explosiveness. I think in time he could develop into something, and he's a guy that I liked pre-draft. I know you weren't as high on him as I was coming out, and obviously nobody was because he didn't really get drafted very highly. But he's a guy that it was nice to see that happen too. It showed.
Yeah, he was the third round pick. So, I mean, they're hoping to get something out of him. And he's just a pure pass rusher at that point, really. At this point, rather than that. But either way, in his career. So, could be relevant, I suppose, in deep leagues if he's healthy and he does end up being one of those guys that gets to the passer. But this probably does, set him back a little bit, unfortunately, if he's not going to be playing the rest of the preseason, as we saw last year with really nothing at all for those rookies. And a lot of people, offense and defense, were wondering, all right, poor year last year. They were rookies, but, people see those big names step up right away and just have amazing games. And I think many of us subconsciously put that out on all the rookies, like, hey, you need to be showing something this year, where, historically, if you look back, it takes time for these guys. They're adjusting to the NFL over the college. And I think by forgetting that, sometimes we do them a disservice.
And some, and it's tough because some of them spoil it for others. With some guys, just make the leap and they're ready to roll and they really take to the next level. But on average, I bet if you look at the stats, it takes guys a lot longer to settle in. I mean, there are some outliers that really take the ball and run with it per se. But it's a big transition going from college life to going to the NFL. And some of these guys just need a little bit more time. Okay, so what else?
More injuries. This one, actually, the next two, I'm going to let you speak on first here, because I know you've dug into these, being the fandom that you are for college and NFL. Kwity Paye, one of your favorites here, he's in a walking boot with a mild, they're saying, right ankle sprain. He had been having very nice reports coming out of camp. It looked like he would probably be an immediate producer. Do you think this is something that's going to linger for him, or do you think that he's going to be maybe not starting right away into the regular season? What have you heard about this one?
Well, so the last I had heard is the Colts were optimistic that he wasn't going to miss any significant time into the season. That being said, you're in a walking boot for a reason, so they want to make sure that he's not putting any extra pressure or doing any extra damage to that. So, he's got to be careful. They want to make sure, what they've seen so far, they've really liked out of him, which is great because we both, we're fans of him coming out thinking that he could be, he could be something potentially nice. But the cool thing about the Colts is they've insulated this defensive end position with plenty of high-end draft picks over the last, 3 or 4 drafts. First or second round type edge guys they've gone after. So somebody's got to step up. If Paye is injured in the preseason and needs some time to heal, Kamiko Toure, Banogu, I mean, one of those guys drafted in the second round over the last few years just has to take the next step and really, either fill in or take the lead for now. And, they shouldn't have to rely on a guy they drafted this year because they put so much draft capital in this position. And they drafted guys that were very talented coming out of college. I mean, a lot of these guys, Kamiko Toure, people thought was going to be a first round pick coming out, and some depending on who you watch. So I like Paye long term. I think it's a good move to just put him in a boot, let him rest, get healed up, because they have plenty of other options that they could rush off the edge. From an IDP perspective, Paye is still the guy to own at the defensive end position on this team. Tyquan Lewis will be another guy that's probably going to play opposite him that I think should be a nice piece to own. But I would keep Teray and Banogu on your watch list. Just see how they do. So far, they really haven't broken out because you would have needed to draft a first-round edge guy if either of these two would have taken that next step, obviously. But time will tell. Before we go down Wuzurike, what do you think about the pay situation?
Yeah, like I said, with the draft capital that they've used, I mean, they used 2 seconds in 2018, a second in 2019. They used a second this year, although they knew Deo was not going to be healthy probably for much of the year, and you'd probably not give him anything this year. Pay was a first rounder. I mean, that's a lot of draft capital on their defensive line. So I agree. I mean, you'd think that they should be able to weather the storm here, but on the other coin, or side of the coin, rather, they probably wouldn't be investing a second and a first again into the defensive line if they thought that they had something with those guys. So do they have enough to, wait, see what happens with Pay until he comes back and probably use those guys as depth pieces outside of, Lewis? Lewis, I think, will actually have a decent year probably if Pay is playing and does what we think he can, because it's going to be Pay and then Buckner probably is the main guys. And Lewis has flashed before. So if he can kind of step up, take another step beyond what he did last year when he started 4 games, they could have a really formidable defensive line. But it's just one of those things where you keep throwing, money at a situation. This term, draft capital, makes me wonder, like, what are you doing? Because you can't be happy with those guys if you keep doing it. But
yeah, I mean, when you haven't gotten production yet from guys that have been in your system for 1, 2, 3 years, I mean, what point do you say, okay, this isn't going to happen with us? When do we change scenery? So, I completely agree that they wouldn't have had to do it if they had it already. And then from the Detroit side of things, Onwuzurike was an interesting. He's an interesting kid because he was their highest drafted interior defensive lineman in this draft, and looks, from everything you've seen in college coming out, looks very explosive. Like he could be a really explosive 3 technique. Elaine Mcneill was out there with the starters. Obviously, he plays a different position. He's more of a nose tackle, space eater, but he looked good too. I mean, as he brings an explosiveness that I think him and Onwuzurike on the field together would be a really fun combo to see. I don't know, because this team's in the middle of a transition, I don't know that they rush Onwuzurike back to just throw him in to get those reps in. They can bring him along slowly and let him, heal up and get to where he needs to be health-wise before they do anything. I mean, it's, from an IDP perspective, it's still Onwuzurike. If you need to play a D tackle in your league, he'd be the one I would target. But, I was pleasantly surprised with how this defense looked in certain situations. Julian Okwara, depending on how your league designates him, could be an interesting addition if he's available. He rushing from the edge position looked really nice. So if if he's an edge designation for you, he could be an intriguing piece to own. Kevin Strong, and don't be fooled by the numbers, people. Kevin Strong every preseason pops off and seems to look the part, and then you don't see him throughout the year, and nobody ever really quite understands why. But he racked up 4, 5, 6 tackles or something in the game and looked explosive. But this might be an opportunity for him to keep a roster spot, but he's not going to be getting reps ahead of guys they drafted and guys that they're building this defense around. So, I'll just put that out there.
Do you think for this year, though, that back injury for Levi is going to cause anything? I mean, if they're sending him to specialists.
Yeah, I don't think I don't know that I don't know how quickly they rush him back. Like I said, I don't think they're going to be in a hurry to throw him into the fire, especially because back's something that you got to be careful with. That's not as easy to bounce back from as MCLs, ACLs, all that stuff that happens. So I wouldn't put a lot of stock in him playing or making a big impact this year. At least that would be my guess at this point in time. But yeah, it sounds like they're getting second opinions and things like that to see kind of where he's at health wise.
And then we got a couple Steelers things here. Sort of go over that I think are all sort of interrelated, if you will. So, report came out from The Athletic that the Steelers do not plan on extending Minkah Fitzpatrick this offseason. And I know he's a very interesting name in fantasy circles. Some people love him, some people do not for fantasy purposes. I think it really depends on your league. If you're in a big play league, I think he can be really nice for you. If you're in a tackle-heavy league, I'm not touching him unless he falls way too late, just because he is not consistent at all. And that is something that I do not like out of my safeties. And then you had said that they restructured Stephon Tuitt's contract. It was about $6.5 million. He said in
they freed up about $6.3 million in change.
And TJ Watt, we may have mentioned this last week. He's holding out at the moment, looking for a new contract. So all of that is interesting. Do you think that Fitzpatrick is back with them next year?
So I think this conversation goes a lot deeper than just one player. Like, is this the last ride for Big Ben and what they're trying to do? You know, like, depending on what they feel like this team is after this season, like if they make the playoffs and go deep and maybe talk Ben into another year, then yeah, I think they find a way to make it work with guys like Minkah. You know, Minka's still a young player that if they decide, you know, things didn't go as well they'd hoped and they start to transition, then, you know, re-signing him either way makes sense for them. Like, he seems to fit in their scheme and they seem to like him, but I mean, I don't know why they wouldn't re-sign him
next year.
Because
they exercise his option. So for 2023,
right.
Do you think they end up extending him?
Is he getting another contract with the Steelers?
Yeah.
I don't see why they wouldn't. I mean, the investment in him wasn't insanely high. He's been, I think, better than what he was with the Dolphins when they got him. I mean,
they send the first back to him.
I'd have to look. I don't remember off the top of my head. It's been a few
pretty
days.
Sure they ended up as like
I think it was a late first
pick they got for him at the end or whatever it was. This makes for a great conversation for everyone out there. But to your point,
at his age, though, I mean, it makes sense to try to re-sign him. I mean, by then he's only going to be, 25, 26. I mean, they could easily give him a 3-4 year contract at a reasonable price because it's not like he's been upper echelon Jamal Adams, Budda Baker level safety, but he's been good for them and he's played well in their scheme. And yes, it hasn't been insanely sexy for IDP purposes, but it's still been good for them from the NFL side of things.
Yeah, it was a 2021. So, and then we won't belabor the point because you can all go see my thoughts if you want to see it sort of in depth right off the bat when the trade happened Thursday night. Joe Schobert was traded by the Jaguars to the Steelers. He'll be playing one of those inside linebacker spots is what they imagine. It was for, I don't know, Jaguars ate like a good chunk of the money that he's owed this year, and then it was
almost $4 million
back.
Yep, almost $4 million and a sixth. Yep.
They haven't been able to read or hear your thoughts to this point. So how do you feel? Who do you think that it affects the most, on the Steelers, on the Jaguars? What do you think's happening?
So when you look at I think it's more interesting for the Jaguars from a fantasy perspective. Schobert to the Pittsburgh Steelers, I mean, he immediately becomes one of those guys that I think his value bumps up. I've been working through my rankings and trying to figure out how he falls into the equation. But I think it makes him nearly weekly startable because he's probably going to be in the inside. And because Devin Bush has been up and down so far in his career, injuries and all the things, like Schobert should be the beneficiary of that, because by midseason, it could be Schobert and Spillane as your two middle linebackers, and Schobert just eats up tackles. From the Jacksonville side of things, I think it's interesting because then you look at, like, what is this defense? What does the linebacker group look like? Who becomes that Mike that's going to get those tackles funneled his way because those players are coming in the middle? Is it Damian Wilson? Is it Shaq Quarterman? Is it Dylan Moses? Who's that guy for them? So I think that's really the more interesting thing to watch in this situation. I think we know Schobert fantasy relevancy goes up, and I think he was more than fantasy relevant before. I mean, he was a really nice linebacker either way, but I think this sends him up a little bit. But then the Jacksonville situation becomes super intriguing I don't know what to expect. The little, I've only watched part of their game. I got to go back through. I tried to do a cursory watch of every game that, the first quarter to see how the teams, kind of the top guys on the team did. And I want to go back through and see how some of these other guys did later in the game. So Jacksonville's on my list to watch tomorrow. It'll be interesting to see how this middle linebacker position plays out now, and the depth, and who plays and who becomes the starter. I mean, Wilson, you would think, has the experience, but I don't know. What do you think? And make sure you check out Kraig's article on Roto Heat for more information.
It's confusing to me. I mean, you always see weird things when teams take over, and they're sort of playing a hybrid 3-4-4-3 after mainly being a 4-3 previously, and I don't think that their personnel fits very well, especially on the edge. So Chase Josh Allen, I think he's more wasted if you're going to be putting him at an outside linebacker. Not say that he can't do it, but I think he's better suited to have his hand in the dirt. And that's not to say he's going to be exclusively doing that. But to me, that puts Jack and then Wilson in the middle. And Jack is clearly the guy to me. But I think, and I put that in there, I think Wilson is probably the next man up. I mean, he had spent 2 years, I believe it was 2 years, because he came from Dallas originally with the Chiefs. And he was sort of a utility playing a whole bunch of different guys or positions, So he's a veteran that's flexible. Their new defensive coordinator, Cullen or something like that?
Yeah, Joe Cullen.
He likes that. So, and I think on a young defense, having a sort of solid veteran that you can put out there to, keep people in line, going in the right place and all that, I think there's use in that. And Jack is that very much too. But Jack just gets bumped up to me in rankings because he's sort of the guy at the moment there. And then Wilson, like I said in the article, I think he could have back end linebacker 3 potentially, depending on how things play out. But I think that's kind of his ceiling. So he's a guy to keep an eye on. I'm not running out to get him right now, but in deep leagues, he's definitely worth a pickup to see how it plays out. And then, we're going to have to see what the Steelers do. Historically, they have one linebacker that plays the majority of the snaps and stays on the field, and the other slightly under that, in that 70% or whatever range. Is that going to be Schobert? Is that going to be Bush? Bush, like you said, we've talked about him on this show before. Schobert had a really great year in coverage in Cleveland, and then he's had some sort of mediocre years after that. So, is that an anomaly? Is he better in coverage than Bush? I think some of that remains to be seen, but it could also be that they're more concerned about Bush's recovery, and they just want to have another veteran stabilizing presence there if they need to play alongside him or be the guy on that defense. So we're going to have to see how that plays out. But, great pickup for them, and considering they may be looking at either Highsmith or Ingram, Schobert, Bush, and then Watt, I mean, that's an improved linebacker core, even with Dupree gone, I think, over what they had last year. They still have a great defensive line. And then their secondary, there's some more question marks there. But for the NFL purposes, they'll probably be serviceable. So improvement for their team, I'd say, at a very reasonable price.
Oh, yeah. Sixth in that contract, absolutely. All right.
I think that does it for the news and notes of the week.
Yeah, I thought so. I tried to look and see if there's anything else that was fantasy relevant. I think that about nailed it. So this week, and really the next 4 weeks that we have left doing the Monday show before we get actual football back, NFL games back, week 1 games back. We're going to kind of talk about what we're seeing from the rookies. We're going to talk about, what we're seeing from the preseason and things like that. So tonight, we wanted to focus on some of the production from some of the rookies. We're going to talk about guys that were highly drafted, the Micah Parsons of the world, Gregory Rousseau. He had a kind of a pop play at the beginning of his career with Buffalo and maybe a little fizzle after. But, we're going to talk about some of these guys. So Kraig, let's get it started with the guys that are near and dear to your heart, the America's team and Micah Parsons. How do you feel about his big preseason week 2 performance? And what was your takeaway from what you saw from him?
I don't remember who said it. There were a couple iterations of it, and I don't think it was even about Parsons, but there were a few people. I think it was Chase Young, someone had referenced to. He had a big play, and we're not here to talk about him, but big old play. And actually, for some reason, I think it was Matthew Berry now. So put him in bubble wrap until the regular season. Like, he's done. He doesn't need any more reps. I wouldn't go that far with Parsons, but that's kind of how I feel. I mean, seeing him out there, he's just ready for the NFL. Yes, he needs more reps. He needs to grow. All young players do. But if you're talking about taking a guy out of college, just putting him in a system, and all right, we're putting you live, he can play. He knows what to do. He was able to cover, rush the passer. We've discussed before that PFF, Pro Football Focus, their grades aren't everything, especially if you sort of look at those next-gen coverage stats and all that. But he rated well across the board. When you're combining him, a little bit pass rushing, a little bit worse in the first preseason game this week against Arizona. But he just had, if you extrapolate those, and those are sort of the numbers that he had a rookie for the year over, 16, whatever it is going to be, 15, 17, what they play, game slate this year, you'd be really happy with it. And I think his play reflected that too. I was, I guess, a little bit more surprised. Going back to over the 2 weeks, Parsons had 5 solos, 2 assists, and a fumble recovery. Nothing amazing, but, being out there flying around was nice to see him. Mm-hmm. Jabril Cox had a really nice game last week against Arizona. He had 7 solos and assists, 2 tackles for a loss. First game, he had 3 solos and assists, and his rating was, in the mid-70s too, which, again, we're moving to a more passing-centric NFL these days where at least your linebackers need to be able to cover. That was sort of Cox's big thing coming out, that kind of why they picked him, and he showed he's able to cover. I think they may end up with a good problem where, they could have 5 linebackers that are starting worthy, depending if LVE is healthy. Smith, a lot of people, he's become really polarizing. He got a lot of money from Dallas. He's a great guy. Fantasy-wise, he's put up numbers, but, there's rumblings out of Cowboys camp, not the team, but, the beat writers and the fans that, Smith just isn't playing up to par of these other guys. So how that all shakes out with him being the guy that's getting the big money will be interesting, considering they brought Neal over. He knows the system, even though it was more as a safety. Now you got the 2 rookies put in with those 3. How that all gets split apart will be interesting. But with how things have played out with the health of their linebackers in the past, it's a good problem to have as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and how awesome would that be as we're in training camp? You hear, massive trade goes down. So we've had Joe Schobert just traded, and then next up, Jalen Smith traded. Like that would be from a fantasy perspective, that would be super, super intriguing because then it opens up for, a Jabril Cox or Keanu Neal to take the next step. And then you just have another fantasy relevant linebacker, and as we're in the middle of our IDP guys invitational, as I'm looking through linebackers and looking through the defensive players to draft for this basically redraft superflex IDP situation, it's like, it would be great to have one more guy that could be really nice fantasy relevant up here that I could be looking at to try to take. So from a fantasy perspective, it sounds fun to talk about. From an actual NFL perspective, and what Dallas has had to deal with over the last few years when it comes to injuries, they'd be smart to just make sure all these linebackers are there because you could rotate them in. I mean, that would kill fantasy value, but you could rotate them in and keep LVE healthy with limiting his snap count each week and just putting him in certain situations where he, statistically speaking, should be better and successful, and then let Cox and Keanu Neal come in. I thought, who was the free agent linebacker? Hines. I thought he wasn't exactly a guy that popped off the stats, but the times that I had watched, because I know I've watched Dallas all the way through at least once. I thought he at least looked speedier than I anticipated. And, I tried to focus on the linebacker group when I was watching because that's an area that really is interesting to see what they do. So, like you said, it's a good problem to have. Parsons, I don't know that, the reps, having him in for the reps is one thing, but I would, if they said they weren't playing him anymore this preseason, I would be fine with it. I'd be like, okay, that's fine. He's shown that he can be sideline to sideline. He can do it all. He's aggressive and smart and instinctual, like all the things you want from your linebacker he can do. So why risk injury?
Well, Dallas doesn't always do things that make sense. But what was it?
True story.
Sully had shared something on the offensive end about Jerry Jones being asked by McCarthy if Zeke should play in a preseason game or something like that.
Oh yeah, no, I posted that. So Mike McCarthy asked Stephen Jones if somebody should be playing. I don't know. It might have been Zeke, but should this guy play? I'm like, why are you asking you're the head coach of this team. You make the decision about these things. They may make the personnel moves and you work with them to help bring in the right people, but nah, they'll be doing that stuff.
And to your point about the linebackers, I think it's probably more likely that they keep Smith just because they declined LVE's fifth-year option. And, I mean, then if you have Neal, I think Neal's even on a one-year deal, but maybe bring him back because he's familiar. You'd have a little bit more money to give him if you let LVE go. You still have some nice depth there. So I don't think Smith is probably going anywhere. He just might not be on the field as much as IDP or league managers would like. So we'll have to see.
True story. All right, so next up we're talking the LA game. So Ernest Jones, what's going on with him? What are we talking about with him?
Yeah, so he sort of had a tale of two games in many regards. So he got the green dot for calling the plays with Jordan Fuller not playing in this game, which is great to see them putting that faith in a preseason game to see how he goes out and does. He didn't start off so well, and he only had, I think it was 3 assists in that game. 38 snaps. He had a poor overall grade. It was around 54% on PFF. Tackling, he had 2 missed tackles, which with that limited number of snaps, it's just going to kill you, especially when you're having 3 assists. But, he sort of recovered after starting off poorly. He showed that he's able to, get through blockers, get through traffic, and go to be around the ball at least, which is something that a lot of rookies struggle with, navigating through that increased speed and, quite frankly, for a lot of these people, size of these guys that they're regularly seeing in the NFL. And he showed decent coverage ability too. So, for a guy that isn't one of the top names for the most part on IDP rookie linebackers' minds, I still think he's a value play. We've discussed that on here before, and I know you liked him too. But when you were watching the game, what did you see out of him?
Yeah, I mean, he definitely looked like a rookie for sure. When I watched, I was like, okay, so he looks like he's still trying to get the system down. Because remember, he came from South Carolina.
Yep.
It's not like they have exactly the most in-depth NFL scheme at the defensive position where he's going to be seeing things new at the NFL level that he hasn't really had to deal with as much at college. He's going to have to do some different diagnosis of the offense and recognize certain things that, and even though they get very vanilla in the preseason because they don't want to show too much off, like you would think with the Chargers having the former Rams coach that they would have some insight and say, hey, look for these types of things because this is kind of what this guy likes. And, I just think that Ernest Jones is going to need some time. I think for him, it's going to be you're going to have him in there to get those reps and get that action and get the live bullets coming at him and before he can really settle in and learn the position. I didn't see anything on his game film, though, from preseason week 1 that made me go, okay, this guy isn't ready for the NFL. It made me think this guy can handle, his athletic ability looked good. He looked every bit of the part. He just made some rookie mistakes in those positions. And, I think week 2 and week 3 of preseason for him will be fun to watch and be interesting to see how he grows from these situations. I still believe in him. I still like him. I have him in a few spots on taxi squads, and a few guys even after last week asked me what the cost would be. I'm like, listen, I'm going to sit on him for a little bit, and I'm not going to move him because I really like the player long-term, especially in this defense because their linebacking group is not strong. He should be able to make a name for himself because I think he's probably the most athletically gifted linebacker they've got right now, even though he's still got some development to do.
So with him being the highest sort of draft capital at that linebacker position, do you think he ends up starting over Kaiser and Reeder, or do you think they defer to one of those veterans to start?
I think the vets probably start because they know the system, and those guys didn't look bad with the time that they've been given so far. The last in their time in the NFL. So I would think they go with those guys unless Ernest Jones makes this like leaps and bounds jump and prove that he needs to be in that lineup week 1. I don't think they'd be in any hurry to, because I think they also have who's the guy they got from Baltimore? Kenny Young, right? So they have like 2 or 3 linebackers that they could try to rotate in the middle of that defense to get Jones enough time to pick it up and learn the scheme. But I think if they're smart, excuse me. I think if they're smart, they want to get him in sooner rather than later, though, because he's their future at linebacker. They didn't spend a third on him for nothing.
Yeah. Moving on here. We're going, and we just talked about them, but the Steelers, so they had their second game because, of course, they played the Cowboys in the Hall of Fame game. And something that confused me to know, and this is still officially week 1, even though they already had a game.
Right.
Super Bowl week is its own week. That counts as a week, but this isn't a week when it's the Hall of Fame game, for those of you charting along at home. So this is the first week, but the second game for the Steelers, Quincy Rochet, someone that we've talked about that I liked is sort of a late round pick. It's having potential to eventually step up at it again. Most likely not this year. They have Highsmith. They signed Melvin Ingram, but he's showing well through 2 games. So in those 2 games, he had 4 pressures, 2 sacks, about a 70% pass rushing grade, and 24 snaps. So again, remember for all of this, 24 snaps in 2 games isn't a lot. They're getting bodies through there. They've seen what different guys can do in different situations. And he had the 3rd highest win rate in pass rushing situations among rookies, which is really interesting to see. And I know that was sort of what we expected him, as more of a pure pass rusher to start coming out of Miami, right?
Yes, sir. He played at a few places in college, but Miami was the last stop.
Okay. And for those of you not aware, I am a college football agnostic. I do watch parts of games. I do not sit down and watch a college football game in whole, except maybe the championship game, because I will fall asleep. So for all of you that are college lovers, go ahead and feel hate on me for that. But yeah, so it is a guy that you could probably get in most drafts, either late or still free now. If you have taxi squad, and I know even in our sort of degenerate leagues, we don't really have rookie taxi squad situations. But in deeper leagues, you can certainly see picking them up and stashing them. So do you think this is a sign of things to come down the road, or this is just sort of a flash in the pan start to the career for Mr. Rochet?
Well, I think you're seeing, what we talked about in the pre-draft process with him. I think we're seeing the fluid pass rusher, kind of the quick first step, some of those things that really made him his money in college and got him on the radar for teams like the Steelers and these teams that run the 3-4 scheme that need the guy to rush from the edge. You're seeing that at the next level. And I think in time he would have a chance to get some playing time across from TJ Watt because look what's ahead of him. They brought in Melvin Ingram, who's, on the downside of the career as an aging veteran. And then Alex Highsmith is a guy that they spent a 3rd on last year who they like. So, I don't think he's a guy that gets in and gets immediate playing time, but they could easily rotate him in. They could easily get him some reps every game when they need somebody to rush a passer on 3rd down. Like you're seeing in the preseason, like, hey, this guy can do the things that we drafted him to do. And though he was a later draft pick, he still is showing some of that promise that we could probably develop him into if nothing else, a situational pass rusher at worst. At best, maybe he's a guy that can win some playing time down the road. I don't know that I'm taking the potential unless I have a deep roster. Like I would leave this guy on the waiver wire, at least at this point. But I like the player. I think he could develop into something good. And Jaws, we love having you around. So you should always be in anything we're doing. What do you think, Kraig?
Yeah, I mean, I still like him as a guy. Degenerate league. Yeah, there's plenty of those for us. If you're into Devi IDP, we're not into the campus to Canton. We're not at that level yet. I think that's probably sort of the well, Brad is. I should speak for myself here. Brad's in the mother of all Devi leagues, so to speak. I couldn't go that far. But yeah. Well, you're still doing it. You're still giving it the good old collegiate try, as they say. So yeah, we're beyond by and large, and that's what when you hear us talking. That's why sometimes I'm trying to speak at a broader, smaller league level. Some of these guys like Rochet, if you're in your 2 defensive lineman, 2 linebacker with a flex, 2 defensive back, 12-team league, Rochet is a guy to just write down somewhere if you take notes. Keep in your memory. He's probably not going to matter this year as far as having a guy to be on your roster. maybe not even next year. We're going to have to see how this plays out because it is only 2 preseason games. But it is the time of the year where some of these later round guys, they need to be making their mark if they want to even make the team. We see 6th-round picks all the time get cut and then have to bounce around the league and nothing comes of them. So when you're hearing us talk about these guys, when we're dropping these terms about, taxi squad, deeper leagues, if you're not in one of those, make sure you're equating that to what that means to you. If it's just someone to think about or someone you're just going to ignore for, the next couple of years.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right. Another edge guy here who we didn't talk a lot about, and he's in even a messier situation as far as I'm concerned with positions than Quincy Rochet and all the people he's having to compete with. But Ronnie Perkins, he had a nice game, 53% of the snaps. I believe that was in the 40s for the Patriots. So he actually saw quite a bit of playing time. He had 4 pressures, 4 solos, and 2 assists. And he was number 2, just above Quincy, at about 24% with a pass rush win rate. Belichick, we know, rookies, he's more reticent than a lot of people, it seems, to just be throwing them into the fire with a starting role and play right away. They have a lot of people on that defense. I mean, just in general, we know how Belichick, if you're tuning in mainly from the offensive side, Patriots love to play mind games with us. In regards to the running backs, they do something similar with their linebackers where one week you can have a guy just ball out and do great, and then he plays, 10% of the snaps the next game. Perkins is, of course, a rookie, and they have a lot of edge guys there. They have Judon, Dietrich Wise, Henry Anderson they brought in, one of Brad's Michigan guys here, Chase Winovich they still had, who had a nice year last year for him. They still have Anthony Jennings, another, I believe, Michigan guy, Uche, right?
And Cameron McGrone, another Michigan guy. I mean, they are the Michigan of Boston area.
Is that a good thing, Brad, based on how Michigan has been the past few years?
I mean, these defensive guys have some talent, but definitely not something I'm super excited about.
And then another guy who had a great game, but we've seen him in the NFL before. He bounced around. Harvey Lange. He was not a priority free agent. He was signed rather cheaply for a reason. But again, he's someone that's been relevant, in spurts in IDP world. So, Brad, I have a hard time feeling that this is going to be anything to hang our hat on and say, "Yep, he's going to break out. He's going to start and be startable in fantasy." But what do you think after that performance by Mr. Perkins?
Yeah. Perkins, I mean, and this is another team that, like the Colts we talked about earlier, where they spent a ton of, day 2 draft capital on defensive positions like edge players, because they drafted Perkins in the 3rd, Anthony Jennings was the 3rd, they got Josh Uche in the 2nd, and that's just all in the last 2 seasons, 2020, 2021. Which obviously doesn't even include Chase Winovich, who, what was he? Was he a 3rd rounder?
He
might have been. Yeah, I'm about to say so. So, in the last 3 years, they've spent 4 draft picks on day 2 guys. It's like, okay, why? If any of these guys are producing, why are you, backfilling with more early round talent at this position when you have other needs? So it's like, I don't know. I've got shares of Winovich. I think that's the only share of New England I have, and it's only – and I doubt – actually, I may not even have that share anymore. I'd have to check. That's in our XFL league. I don't even know if I have that share. So
I have Duggar in a few, but that's in the secondary.
Yeah, New England's typically a team when it comes from a fantasy perspective. The last few seasons I've just kind of steered clear from because you just can't trust anything that's going on there. I mean, the tough thing this year is I want to buy into offensive guys like Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith, but I'm like, it's hard to trust the Patriots from a fantasy perspective. I mean, they do so much rotation and they do so many different things. It's like, what can you really hang your hat on to say, this for sure?
Yep. All righty. Well, I think we're in agreement there. It's just too hard to say, off of one game with everything that they have there for a rookie. Perkins could develop into someone really nice. He's got great size. He's a violent pass rusher. But I don't know.
Agreed.
Go ahead.
I just said, agreed.
Yeah.
Love the talent of the player for sure.
We're going to bounce around here. We're going to let you speak on another one of your guys here, Derrick Barnes. So preseason again, he had 8 defensive snaps. He had a solo and an assist. He was noted as doing very well in coverage, but he had a 93.1 overall grade. So, 8 snaps. It's probably easier to do that than on 50 snaps. But what did you see out of him? And if you want to even expound that farther into the linebacking core in general, how did you feel about your Lions from that point of view?
I was really surprised that they even played him because he had been, having some – they hadn't been in training camp very much because of, just some nagging stuff going on injury-wise. So I was really surprised that he got in for 8 snaps, but he looked sideline to sideline, which is what I was hoping to see. He's another one of those guys that because of the talent in front of him or lack thereof, he probably could get early playing time. But it's one of those things where Detroit as a team is I think they're going to overplay their talent level at some points during this year because, I think the defensive scheme that Aaron Glenn is putting out there is really beneficial to boosting guys' value and their potential. We don't have a terrible linebacking group. It looks like from what we've seen thus far, the Okwara brothers are going to be standing up a little bit more. So they're both going to be rushing off the edge. And, Romeo was, a sack leader last year. I mean, he had, 15 sacks or something, if I remember correctly. He produced very well rushing the passer. So if both the Okwara brothers are rushing the passer and you've got, a guy like and Derrick Barnes probably is not going to be a starter from week 1 because they signed Alex Anzalone and they've got Jamie Collins still. So the veteran guys will probably be in front first. But it wouldn't surprise me if come mid-season Derrick Barnes was getting a significant amount of snaps because he's the most athletic interior linebacker we've got. I didn't see him and Sean Deion Hamilton were the two that that I wanted to see because it would be nice if those are 2 guys that we could see on this team for years to come. Deion Hamilton's a guy that was with Washington that hasn't been a super high end name, and I don't know that he'll ever really truly be fantasy relevant, but he's got a good athletic profile.
Yeah.
Barnes I think could be fantasy relevant though because he can drop the boom. I mean, he definitely has some physicality to his game to go with the athletic ability as long as he stays healthy. But I'm excited. I mean, our linebackers played a lot faster than they have in all of the Matt Patricia era, which was good to see. I mean, you could clearly see on the field, you saw the Matt Patricia linebacker and Jelani Tavai rumbling, bumbling, stumbling, as Chris Berman used to say. And then you saw the new age version of a linebacker, Derrick Barnes, who's flying all over the field. I mean, so you're seeing that, that kind of those 2 worlds just do not mix. I mean, Tavai looks slow, Barnes looks fast. And as long as you're not Jared Davis fast, where you're overrunning plays and missing, but you're fast and smart, I mean, that's good. You can rack up the tackles that way. So
before we get to our question here, Anzalone, do you think that he's going to end up being a starter for you guys?
I think so. He probably just because he knows what Aaron Glenn's looking for, I think he has a chance. They have the history together. I don't see any reason why he wouldn't start the season. But like I said, I don't know. Between him and Jamie Collins, I don't know who the odd man out is. If Derrick Barnes proves that he needs playing time, which one of those he pushes, it's hard to tell right now. Anzalone looks a little faster than Collins from what I've seen so far in training camp, but speed doesn't always mean anything. Collins has the veteran, the success level at the NFL. So, and we have a question from our boy Jaws. So Seattle's been stocking up on young linebackers. Brooks, a sure thing to replace Wright's role or still unclear? Kraig, why don't you hit this one first?
Yeah, I think it's Brooks. I mean, and maybe I've overlooked something, but I don't think they have a ton of investment. I mean, they have Barton from a few years ago. Ben Burke-Hyven, who again, sort of a different position and hasn't showed a whole lot to me. But man, you have Wagner there, who's just sort of been the guy and will be, I think, for at least a couple more years. But they invested a first-round pick in Brooks last year, and we figured he was going to be brought along slowly because they had Wright, because of the weird off season. But Brooks showed some things towards the end of the year there, and I don't have any doubts that he's going to start unless something catastrophic happens. And I can see him eating into Wagner's stats. I mean, not a ton. Wagner's not going to fall off the map, I don't think. But Brooks is an athletic linebacker to play next to him. And Wagner at this point is sort of the savvy old veteran who will probably be able to stick around a little bit longer than some just because, he is so smart, knows where to go, knows what to do. But Brooks, I'd say, is the future there still.
Well, I was trying to look at how last year turned out. I don't see there really being any drop off for Wagner, at least for probably another maybe 2 years, I would guess, short of something unforeseen happening. It's got to be Jordan Brooks because he's, they've made the investment in him, and he's probably the most athletic of the young guys they've invested in. I mean, between the guys you mentioned and then some of the college free agents they brought in over the last few years, it's Jordan Brooks or, is Seattle a team that goes to target a linebacker? So maybe they call Dallas up and try to trade for a Jalen Smith or some of these, whoever, or they hit the free agent market when guys are released, because we're already seeing teams having to start cut. I think you've got to cut 5 guys this week and then
get to 85 or something.
You cut it to 85 and then, on the way to 53. So, is Seattle a team that targets a linebacker? I think either way, I think Jordan Brooks gets significant playing time this year. So if you like Jordan Brooks last year before the season and you liked what you saw during the season, you should be excited for him this year because his defense looks better. The defensive line, I think, is still suspect. I really don't know what to make of them. I don't know how I feel about that group as a whole, but, linebackers I think are solid and their secondary looks to be very good as well. So I don't know what to do with my hands.
Yeah, Brooks, especially if someone dropped him and you're in a dynasty league, and then go scoop him up. But it sounds like you have him, so hopefully.
Yep. All right, so we got 3 minutes and we got 3 guys left. Can we get them all in a minute each?
I think we're not big into cornerbacks, especially rookie cornerbacks for the most part. Patrick Surtain Jr., 11 coverage snaps, allowed 0 catches, had a pick 6, 94.8% PFF grade, which is best for cornerbacks. Do you think he will start this year, Brad? And do you think he is a viable play in most IDP leagues that we'll even say require cornerbacks?
Well, so Ronald Darby, Kyle Fuller, Surtain, of those 3 guys, I think Surtain and Kyle Fuller could be the starters. I mean, Ronald Darby, you could see him be more of a slot corner in this scheme, if they really want to.
Who is it that they drafted? And do you have the chart?
Yeah, I've got the roster.
Guy who.
Yeah, they got Michael Ojemudia last year, and then they drafted Jamar Johnson in the 5th round.
I think it was Ojemudia. He looked really nice last year too for him. So.
Yeah, he looked good in the slot as well. So they have, like you've talked about with your Cowboys, and they're a good problem to have. Denver has a good problem to have. They've got good corners across the board, so they don't have to start Surtain unless he continues to tell them, hey, I need to play based on my play. If he keeps doing this in the preseason where he's just shutting people down, yes, they're going to want to start him. What that'll probably tell us from a fantasy perspective is early on in the season, you'll probably have a good chance for him to have some good fantasy weeks because teams are going to want to test him out. A rookie, he can't be that good. But if he keeps doing stuff like this where he's just shutting down people's wideouts, then eventually that drops off and then people stop targeting him as much. And, does it happen this year? I don't know. With the way this team is, they don't have to start him. What do you think?
I doubt he starts, but it's very possible. Like you said, we'll have to see. They use high draft capital on him. He's playing great right now. If he continues to, yeah, he probably does. Is he startable in fantasy leagues? I don't think so. Not initially, but we'll see. If he starts across from Fuller, yeah. In quarterback required league, sure. 2 more we're going to get in here quick. Gregory Rousseau, who I know you're just hoping to be skipped, but he didn't have a huge stat line. He had 11 snaps, but he had 3 pressures, a tackle, a sack, and a tackle for a loss. Brad, after the 11 snaps where you got to see him against your Lions, are you now of the opinion that the Bengals made the right move by passing on Sewell?
No, I mean, it was kind of that welcome to the NFL moment for Panay. He's come in and looked real good in training camp, and everybody's been pumping him up. I mean, it was good to see him get kind of shown the door a little bit in that move. Rousseau did what Rousseau does. He's got the athletic profile and the build and the bend to be able to do those types of things. Sewell just needs to, remember, Sewell hadn't been on a field in live game action for a year and a half. So, I mean,
Rousseau hadn't either, I don't think. Didn't he opt out too?
I think he played a little last year, didn't he? He might have not played at all.
Phillips and Rochet.
Was it just Phillips? It might have been. Off the top of my head, I don't remember. But, so I'm not, like all players in week 1 of the preseason, I don't get my hopes up and I don't go crazy negative either way. Like, things looked good, things looked bad. I'll look at the end of the preseason and kind of reevaluate how I feel. But, Sewell didn't look terrible after he got beat that time. You could tell that he was learning from his mistakes. But Rousseau, I thought, looked the part, every bit of the part of what Buffalo needed him to be and needs him to be going forward, because like we've talked about on the show, the edge guys are getting older on this team. They needed a guy like Rousseau that could come in and really take that next step as he's developing. So I really think they start to use him as a situational guy throughout the season. And I bet by the end of the season, we probably see his snap counts continuing to go up a little bit. Because he's got a burst to him. He's got a nice burst coming off the edge.
Yeah, he showed what, people were so excited about potentially for him. He just is a pure pass rusher right now. And if you're in a big play league, he could have relevance fantasy-wise this year. If he continues to show up like that, even in limited playing time, if he's able to get to the quarterback, he's not going to do that every time. But that's why people are excited about him. And he needs to get more well-rounded to be a consistent fantasy asset, but it's a nice start.
Absolutely.
Josh's question here is the Saints D worth a hold in Dynasty? I can see the team turning around real quick. To me, there's just too many questions for him. If you're in a deep league, maybe they have a fine secondary if Lattimore plays. If he's out for any period of time here, we'll have to see. Linebackers, they have Davis for a few years here yet, and they've invested in Warner and Bond, but we really don't know what either one of those guys are going to do. They had Davenport, which they traded up for several years ago, traded an additional first to get, who hasn't done much of anything. Jordan's getting older, and we don't know what Turner's going to be. To me, there's just way too many question marks to be holding them. Red?
Well, and I think Jaws' second point, the cap situation will be the big hindrance for them one way or the other as they try to get out of this kind of cap situation they put themselves in. It's going to be hard for them, and they're going to have to work through the draft and through some of these other situations, trades and things like that, to really fix this roster and add to it. If your league is deep enough where you're rostering 2 defenses, fine. I'm okay with that. If you're in one of those situations where having 1 defense is really all you need, then I probably wouldn't be super high on these guys. I would probably look elsewhere. Some of these young defenses that may be a little cheaper that you see moving in the right direction. This team could, if in a year from now you said, man, New Orleans is turning around, they're looking good, things are moving in the right direction, it wouldn't surprise me. But also, if you turned around in a year and said, man, this team looks to be a dumpster fire, I wouldn't be surprised either, because they've made some real misses with their first-round defensive ends here in the last few years. And Turner obviously remains to be seen, but Davenport so far has not really produced at the level they expected. So
he hasn't been healthy either, which doesn't help.
No, it doesn't help.
All right, we got one more name I want to cover here just because of the week that he had, and he was a favorite of us. JOK, or Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, as he's known. 8 tackles, 1 sack, 3 tackles for a loss, and he laid out some hits in that game. That guy was flying around kind of like how we thought he might be. He was used all over the field, kind of like we suspected Isaiah Simmons would be and was last year, and that's sort of the comp that I had for how I thought the Browns, don't get mad at me, although the Bengals would be happy to have him too, I think. He played most of his snaps as a true linebacker, about 3/4 of them, but approximately the other quarter he played in the slot. But he had a couple of edge rusher, pass rusher attempts. So good game for him overall. Great way to come into the NFL and make a statement with the way he was laying out hits. Do you think that he ends up being one of the starting linebackers for this team for most of the year?
I think so. I'm gonna say yes, just because when you look at what's ahead of him, I mean, they put the most draft capital behind this kid, and he's probably the most athletically gifted that they've got on the team. Taki is fine, so is Mac Wilson, and Walker they brought over from the Colts, but JOK is far more athletically gifted than any of these guys, and I think as long as he can pick up the recognition and understanding of what they're trying to do as a defense, why not? I mean, it looks like they're probably going to have him on the weak side anyway, so it's like let him continue. That'll limit his snap count a little bit because typically a lot of teams play a lot of nickel and dime coverages, so sometimes you don't need those 3 linebackers on the field, but I don't see why he can't be a regular starter throughout the season. But I liked him beforehand. So coming into the preseason, I thought the talent should show out, and it did. What do you think?
I think that's why they played him in the slot, for a quarter of a snap show to see how he could do if they wanted to leave him on the field, and he ended up, a switch or something, getting matched up with a running back or smaller receiver.
Well, I mean, absolutely. When you look at guys like Isaiah Simmons and other guys that in college played a ton of different positions throughout the secondary, JOK has got the ability to do all that. You just at Notre Dame, you didn't necessarily see him have to do that. So if he can do that at the next level, face slot guys or tight ends that flex out into the slot, things like that, why not? I mean, he's pretty good at tracking the ball and going after it. So if he can do all those things, keep him on the field.
And he only played 2 years of college too. I mean, junior, senior year was all he played. So he is still just getting used to the game, period. So
right. Absolutely.
That's what we got for week 1.
All right, folks. So week 1 of the preseason's in the books. We've got more preseason action coming. We got 2 more weeks of preseason. We got 3 more weeks of the IDP HeatSeekers show. So I want you guys to know that Kraig and I are still doing Roto Heat stuff throughout the season, but Monday Night Football, you guys are not going to want to be watching us at 9:30 while Monday Night Football's on. So during the season, we are going to shift our content to better suit the needs of the community. Monday nights, you won't see Kraig and I live streaming, but we will be pumping out IDP content on rotoheat.com. So make sure you go there. We're also going to be doing other live streams. If you're with us last year, thank you guys. We appreciate it. We're going to be doing the Tuesday night show like we're doing now, and then we'll have a Wednesday night show that's redraft specific, and then we'll have DFS stuff probably on Sunday morning, but that's still being worked out. So make sure you guys, if you haven't already liked and subscribed and done all those things that I tell you to do every time you see my wonderful face on the internets, do that. And you'll know when we're dropping content because we're going to be dropping lots of content on YouTube throughout the season. So Kraig will still be doing all sorts of IDP goodness. He's also, I'm sure you guys have seen on Twitter, him working with Gary Van Dyke, the IDP tipster. He'll be doing stuff with their team as well, helping out there. So you'll still see his Tuesday nights. Oh, so you're competing with me on Tuesday nights.
Half the show.
I'm gonna have to go over there and make fun of you while I'm trying to host my show and mess with you.
And you'll have to do the same for guests for some of it, and I keep thinking about you, but I'm like, oh, you're busy, so I mean, you could just drop Sully and jump over, I suppose, and do his own devices.
Poor Sully. I'll just leave him hanging. So it'll be fun. Make sure you like and subscribe to what they've got going on over there as well, because Kraig's helping out their team, and their team does an excellent job. For those of you in the IDP community, Gary's been the name to watch. I know today everybody's been sharing our stuff, but he was doing this well before we were doing it, and he does a great job and has an excellent history and track record. So make sure you go over there as well and check that out. And then once we get to the off season, you'll get me and Kraig back on Mondays chit-chatting and getting you ready for the 2022 season. So that's my spiel. I'm sticking to it. Kraig, as always, brother, it's a pleasure hanging out with you for the evening. And we've got more questions. So do you want to answer these questions? It looks like we got another question. Las Vegas, Tanner Muse. What do you think about Tanner Muse? Can he play linebacker?
I think he did play, didn't he, for him in the first preseason game here?
He did. Yeah, he was a little bit more in the linebacker position. I think he was on the strong side, if I remember correctly.
You know, you want to talk about a mess. Although, boy, did they sign KJ Wright, or did he just visit there?
He visited. He didn't sign yet.
Someone signed with the Raiders, I thought. It is late for me and those not sleep baby nights. So Corey Littleton looked completely lost last year. If he doesn't improve, I could see him not playing. Morrow is a sneaky guy that has shown well for them, and he's been playing. I mean, since he was, for some reason, I don't remember this. I'm pretty sure he was not drafted. It's either that or he was a very late round, 6th or 7th round pick for the Raiders, but he's played a lot for them and has shown well and improved each of his years. And then Kwiatkowski was sort of the guy last year for him when he was healthy. But that linebacking core still is not what you want. So if he shows something, I mean, we just talked about with JOK, they like to have these guys, teams more and more, that sort of safety linebacker hybrid. They can play outside and, in theory, play in man, but are just better at coverage is the point than some of these old school linebackers. So do I think that he is going to come out as a 3rd round pick and just, blow the doors off? Maybe. I don't expect it right now. We're going to have to see more of what he shows. But if you're in a really deep league, go ahead and, put him on your list. But Morrow, as we wrote about in my cryptozoology IDP series, if you haven't checked that out, but I talked about Morrow in one of those, and I think it was the one that just came out number 8. So I do like Morrow as a value play on that defense this year.
Yeah, Morrow should start at the mic and probably get the most fantasy production. As long as Muse comes back healthy, I think he could develop into something nice in this defense because, quite frankly, he's probably one of the more talented linebackers they've got. I mean, I know they're trying to convert all their safeties to play linebacker too. But,
I think Diablo's another one. Yeah, I forgot about him.
Yeah. So, so I think Muse is a fun guy to put a chip on and see what happens though, Pop Warner. So hopefully that helps you out, man. And good luck with that. As always, if you guys need us, rotoheat.com. You can like and subscribe and comment on these videos, and we keep an eye on them and we'll reply to those comments ASAP. Thank you guys for hanging out with us on a Monday night. We appreciate you guys, and we'll see you tomorrow for the Dynasty Heat Seekers with Matthew McCarthy and Sully and I. Have a good night, guys.
Also, right there, playlist. Hit it. Watch the videos. Do it.